Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Navigating Amateur Motocross, part of the Coach Robb Podcast Network. We're proud to have this show being presented to you by HBI Auto. If you guys are Porsche specialists, you definitely want to be getting in touch with them. They'll find you a car and or keep yours maintained. So, Mr. Derek Brown, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm wonderful, man. How are you?
I am doing great. I just can't believe we're on show number 20. The feedback from the listeners and the subscribers has been next level month over month. I don't say that arrogantly. I say it actually very humbly. And I appreciate your time again today. I'm super pumped about today's conversation.
Yeah, me too.
You and I were talking a little bit before we turned on the recording. The parity between the human body and the motor is so similar. It's almost scary sometimes. And we're going to be walking through a couple things here today about, when you look at that dependability and reliability, which we talk a lot about, especially in the motor world where there's no guarantees, it's always interesting when we look at the various things that causes a motor to let go. I think, and I wanted to get your opinion on this as a human being, and we're in the world of human performance. It is interesting to me how many people underestimate what heat will do to the human body. I live here in Central Florida. It's nothing to be 95 plus degrees and nearly 100% humidity. And I wanted to kind of get your opinion at the onset of this conversation. When you look at heat in regards to that motorcycle, how do we keep ourselves, whether it's somebody who's got a brand new bike, maybe you can give some insight. What would you recommend? What adjustments should they make? Me being naive, I think oversized radiator makes sense immediately. A lot of people tend to only associate that with, well, I'll do that after I do a motor mod. But again, that's just me and my layman's terms in that regards. What do we do, in your opinion, or what do you do with all the teams that you work with, riders that you work with, to get heat reliability?
That's a absolutely fabulous question. It's very, very tough. And we recently had a bike that came through that I think had a heat related failure. And I mean, all the signs are there for that, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I think you're on to something here that heat mitigation is absolutely necessary, obviously in the human body, but equally so in the engine. And we just take it for granted a lot. You buy a stock bike, they've done a lot of engineering and it works for the most part. But I mean, I think we've all witnessed it. There are certain riders and athletes and people out there who will take a bone stock motorcycle that has passed Yamaha's durability requirements or Honda's or KTM's, and they're out there smoking. They can get it so hot in a moto, it's puking out the vent tube and puking out the oil overflow tube and, smoking clutches and having problems. And they come back from the moto. I mean, you can smell the bike as it goes by you on the track, and then they get back into the pits and they dump the oil and it's like, just makes you want to throw up. It got super hot. So there's a lot to that. And I think it's a combination of doing everything we can do on the engineering side. So like you said, can we upsize the radiator, which is very hard to do because they don't just sell that. So you got to find some company or whatever. Or I think the best mitigation for racers, especially Loretta goers or amateur national guys, fans, adding a fan to your bike is an absolute must. All the pro teams run them. I think that's huge, and not enough people are doing that. You can spend very minimal amount of money to do that. There's some kits that are pretty cheap that work pretty good. And that's huge. And you would never think that, we go fast enough. Why would this little itty bitty fan help me? But at the end of the day, you actually do not go that fast all the way around the racetrack. There's tight turns and corners and sections where the bike is not getting good airflow. And that fan is like you're going 35 all the time, even in your slowest corner. And then when you're going faster than that, well, you just get, more air. I would say you probably have witnessed this. Where would you have witnessed in your world? Maybe it's a real hot, muggy, stiff, stuffy day, and they're doing a triathlete or triathlon, and there's no wind. They're going to be way hotter than a day where there's some level of wind coming off their ride or run, I would assume. Probably very similar, I would bet.
No, you hit the nail on the head. Like we just, at the time of this recording, we just had the Women's World Championships in island of Kona, Hawaii. And, you think about being on an island, you think about crosswinds. They seem great. But what's interesting is like the run goes into what's called the energy lab. So when you're coming into the energy lab, the wind's hitting you on the face. Some people would look at that and go, isn't that going to slow your run time down? It does, because you're running against the wind. But here's the catch 22. You get to the turnaround point in the energy lab, the headwind now becomes a tailwind. And to your point exactly, now you start to overheat because people think, oh, you're slowing down running into the wind, but you don't realize the cooling effect of that wind going over it. No pun intended. It's just a radiator effect on a human, right? Now when the wind's behind you, then you add the compound heat coming down, the reflection of the lava coming up, and you don't have any kind of wind to help wick away that heat. It definitely becomes a problem. And this is the part that I find interesting. And I don't want to, jump too far ahead, but I want to get a little bit more of your opinion. This to me is where pacing comes in, right? If you go into a 1 hour race with the intensity like you're only going out for 6 or 8 minutes, it sounds very obvious when we're having a podcast conversation, but hey, if you go out too hard too early, it's not if you're going to grenade, it's when. You've been kind to send me some things where you're like, dude, this guy needs to shift. And I know we've spoken on the show as recent as the last episode. You're like, they think the bike is really accelerating. And then like you've shown in dyno reports, you've talked about it just going out in the field and learning how to make sure your bike's constantly accelerating. You've sent me things and you're like, hey, look, it's like screaming. If he would just upshift, he would be faster. But then when we bring back what we're talking about here in this first conversation point today, if you're over revving the bike, you're just overheating the bike. And we all know heat robs energy, whether it's human or motor. It's almost like, why would you continue to do that? And I know there's a couple pros, Deegan is one that's renowned for panic revving it in the air. Barsha, same idea. In your opinion, why does Deegan and Barsha still do that? I know people chalk it up and say that's your riding style, but if I'm working with you as a mechanic, if I'm speaking to you from a mechanical standpoint, you're like, dude, there's no reason to do that. You're overheating the bike, you're overstressing the bike, and you're even slowing it down. In your opinion, and obviously, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know how much you've worked with Barsha and or Deegan separately, but let's take the face off the shoulders. What would you say to somebody who's doing that except stop?
Yeah, I wish we could really have more influence there. And maybe this podcast over time kind of will. There's a great video that popped up from Verb Moto just the other day on YouTube. And it was like, I looked 20 years ago. And I don't remember. I think Chisholm was in there. Tomac was in there. Probably Izzy. But all these guys who are now pros and kind of at the end of their career, right? 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in that era. And that's the era I raced in and got coached in, quote unquote, not just coached actively, but just your friends, your people, the people around you, the pros you rode with. And one of the things, like, if you just we had local guys in the area that just screamed the bike like on a 125 or 85 would be always in the, let's just call it 1 gear less than you were in. So they were in first, you were in second, you were in third, they were in second, that type of deal. And they're always wrapped out and they're always on the clutch and they never won races and you always beat them. And everybody kept trying to go tell them, hey, man, like you really need, and if you did that, right, like early in your racing careers, you start to get faster, you start revving more and getting more out of the bike. And then you think it's fast, but then somebody comes along and coaches you like, hey, you really should shift here. You need to do this. And like, for example, back then, we didn't have a ton of budget. And I think budgets have changed in racing. Like we had to make the motorcycle last a period of time or I wasn't going racing. Right. And so I remember I had KX80s one year and we started tearing them up out of nowhere. Like just I went from not ever having a bike problem to like, man, every month I was like going through a crank. And so we were new to the sport. We didn't know what the heck we're doing, kept taking them back to the same guy to rebuild them. And he was well-known, good builder. And at some point, at that same time frame, somebody's coming up to you like, hey, why are you doing that? Why are you holding it wide open in the air all the time? And why are you not shifting here? And, all these things. And, a couple other changes, add a little more oil to your premix ratio. What are you running? Oh, why are you running 50-1? Hell no, go run 32-1. Oh, we don't know. Right. So all of a sudden your bike starts lasting better because you've made some improvements mechanically, oil and things like that, better oils. And then number two, hey, I'm not just wrapping the bike out for no reason, and that video and Verb, it's on YouTube, was phenomenal because if you go watch it, it's the fastest guys on the planet still to this day, like Tomac's in there, right? And on every single jump, the stark contrast from what I was watching at Ponca clips from this week is every single jump, every single kid in every single class let off the gas. And right before they landed, they hit the gas. And
you're talking about the older Verb movie.
Yeah, the older era, like I grew up in. That's what we grew up in. Gotcha. It's like hit the gas as you land. Like I can hold it wide open there all I want. It doesn't make the bike go faster. But nowadays, go watch the videos now and like the kids on 65s, 85s, all the way up. It's just like every straightaway, every jump, every opportunity that tire leaves the ground, they're just wide open. The bike screaming 16,000 plus RPM. And it's just endless. I mean, all you hear is rah, 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 like all the time. And it was a stark contrast to go watch that video. And I think it started with Barsha. He just never lifted. Verb did a big feature on it. And I think it just really cascaded quickly because it sounded cool. It sounded fast. Kids don't really know that that's hard on bikes, right? And a lot of parents don't know, oh, it does that. It's supposed to do that. I mean, if this were any other form of motorsport, the engineers would just be having heart attacks. You don't see F1 or MotoGP guys just wide open on the limiter. Like, for example, and Kyle Swanson had a great video, the guy we had on our show early. He had this ages ago, but you don't see MotoGP guys going to the corner, pulling in the clutch, holding it wide open on the limiter, and then clutch bombing it through the corner. You don't see that. And if they did,
Right.
they'd be fired in 5 seconds. Like, if that's how you ride, we're not doing that. So there's a big difference there in motocross. And I don't know where it all, it just started back then. So I would try to tell those guys quit doing it, but you got to get the kid to quit doing it early. Because as soon as it's a habit on 65s and then 85s, and I seen it at Loretta's, I think we talked about this in the show already. I always laugh. If you go watch it Loretta's in the 10 Commandments or that Storyland triple, there's like a double, or sometimes a double triple.
Yeah.
And you'll see kids go through the 10 Commandments doubling. And between every single little baby, those are small doubles, right? Like they're really tiny. I mean, what are they? Probably 7 feet apart or 6 feet apart, like one bike length, right?
Yeah.
And so they're basically in first gear. You could do those doubles in first gear, right? And so they're going, brap, however fast they need to go, which is not that fast. And then between every single one, the bike's wide open, brap, and then they let off. And then they go, brap, wap, and you're like, why? What are you accomplishing, right? And then on top of that, the let off, like, it's just not good. And then you see it in the Storyland triple where there's a double triple, and most kids there don't do the triple, right? The pro class, the B class, some do, but most of the kids are not doing it, and yet they do the double, wide open, land, and then they let off for the next double because it's so small, and then wide open and then let off, and it's like all you're doing is tearing your parts up, and people don't understand that. But like, even on the 4-strokes that have rev limiters, if they didn't have a rev limiter, your bike would blow up the second you let it wide open. So if your 4-stroke didn't have one, you would rev it and it would rev so high that a part would just snap and shatter immediately. There would be absolutely no like recourse. It wouldn't happen like over 5 hours or 3 hours. If it had no rev limiter, the bike would instantly grenade. So that's why 4-strokes have them. 2-strokes don't have a rev limiter. They kind of have a rev limit where the bike stops making useful power. And depending on some tuning things, that can be really, really high. Like sometimes when we're dicking around on some testing stuff, we might see 17,500 RPM on like a 125 or an 85 or something if I just hold it wide open like they do in the jumps. So when you hear a motor that sounds really sick, when a kid goes in the air and it hits that next level where it goes from like wide open to just, screens up, that's like 17,000 RPM. So they don't make any horsepower out there. They make just enough horsepower to overcome the friction of the engine at 17,000 RPM to spin that number, right? But if you had to put it on the ground, there's literally 2 horsepower or 1 horsepower. It's just not going to drive you down the track. But there's no limit on those because there's no valve springs and things that will, like those things can't take that RPM on a 4-stroke. But on the flip side of that, like your connecting rod, your piston, the bearings inside the cases, all that stuff are going through tremendous G forces. And those G forces are tremendous. We're talking like the amount of force that's on that piston and rod far exceeds being shot by like a 30-06 or something like that. Like we're talking insane numbers of force, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 Gs. So whatever the weight is times 8,000 of its weight of load being applied. And that, just think about it. What wears out parts? Well, if I'm trying to flex and bend something, if I add to that flex and bending, which is what we're doing here, it's going to just wear out those parts. And it's going to, you have main bearings and rod bearings and pistons. It's stretching and bending and doing that stuff. So it just shortens the life of your bike. So can you do it? Yeah, sure, you can do it. And if you're into keeping your equipment up to date, like the pro teams are, which is every single week they're getting fully serviced, you can get away with it. And at the amateur level, most of these families aren't really on that program. And even the ones that say they're going to do it, they don't do it. Well, we only had 1 race on that bike. Well, we'll go a second race on that motor, and most of the time they're okay. Bikes are pretty impressive. Engineering continues to move forward, but every once in a while, something breaks and you're like, well, a piece of crap part, or this guy didn't build something right, or whatever it was. And it's like, well, that bike would last you another 3X or 4X or 5X if your kid just didn't hold it wide open over every single jump. So, and then of course you said builds heat. It's hard on stuff. But the number one thing on heat, to get off on this tangent, I'll let you go in a second. If ask you some questions would be great, is clutches. So that's where I really, if I could really wave, you can rev your bike all you want. The life is the life. But if you start slipping and using that clutch, that's when you start tearing, especially 4-strokes, you just start tearing up motorcycles.
You had a couple things that I wanted you to elaborate on. When you talked about seeing 17,000 on the dyno, and I know each bike's slightly different, but just approximate range, where is the sweet spot? Let's start with a 4-stroke. Where's the sweet spot versus, like you say, in the air, if you just pin it, let's assume the the rev limiter does its job. But when you're in the air wide open, what does the RPMs go on a 4-stroke, and where's the sweet spot for range wise on a 4-stroke on the ground?
So we're talking amateurs. Most kids are 250Fs. There's some 450s, but for 250F's sake, the rev limiter on almost all the production 250s right now is 14,000 RPM. And by the way, go watch that Verb video. And it's initially, you'll watch that if you do. It's on their YouTube channel. It's like, 20 years ago, I think it's the title, but you'll think they're 450s. And you'll think they're 450s because they rev so much lower in the video. And then back then we had really loud, obnoxiously sounding pipes. They didn't sound cool. We hadn't figured that out yet, right? They weren't just loud, but they were just obnoxious sounding. They didn't sound good. Now the pipes kind of sound good for a single cylinder fart machine. They actually sound pretty decent. Back then they just sounded terrible. But that said, back then you might be, started out 12.5 and then I moved to 13 and then, 13.5. And nowadays we're about 14,000 is that limiter. And so the peak torque on that motorcycle engine is around 9 to 11. And while that's not peak horsepower, peak torque is your peak pulling power in any given gear. So like, where will that bike pull your arms the hardest? In any gear, whether it be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, it's going to pull its hardest at peak torque on any engine. Now, 2-strokes, generally peak torque's about right where peak horsepower is. So that's why they're a little different. But 4-strokes, if you could optimize, you would want to be at peak torque at any time you're driving. And it's a little more complicated than that because technically when you're in a gear lower, there's still more torque at the tire than in the next gear. But the point is, that's not the sweet spot of the engine. And the sweet spot's way lower. A gear shift on a 4-stroke might be 1,500 RPM. So if you're shifting at the limiter at 14,000, you're only dropping to 12.5. You're still above really where that engine wants to do its most work. And it's really hard for kids to understand this these days. When I grew up, it was very obvious because the bikes really had like a descending power curve. So really what's changed in 4-strokes has not been how much torque they make. That number almost hasn't changed in 20 years. So the actual, what we call BEMAP and how much air and fuel we get into one revolution really hasn't improved. What has improved is at higher RPMs, we've maintained that air and fuel. Like our efficiency has gone up, right? So kind of like the peak strength of an athlete who might be trained and then sat on the couch for a year, they can still lift 1,000 pounds or what they go, the strongest guy in the world, right?
Yep.
But when he's in peak form, he might be able to do that 10 times or whatever we call it, or he has more endurance, right? Well, our race engines have just evolved where we've really optimized the efficiency, but we actually haven't improved their peak torque number. When I grew up, they signed over on power. So if you tried to rev them to the rev limiter, the damn 4-stroke just didn't go anywhere. You're like, I got to shift it. You kind of short shifted it on your own. And then they did great. They were way faster than the 125s were. Nowadays, they do pull all the way to the limiter. Like the power on almost all the motorcycles, with the exception of like maybe the Suzuki and the Honda, don't nose over at all at the limiter. And so the rider never really gets a sensation that it's ever truly slowing down. And so they're incentivized a little bit. And that's where improvements have been made, right? But yeah, so and then on the 2-stroke side, almost all 2-strokes, is a crazy fact for you. It took me years to even see the correlation, which is really dumb. Whether it be a 65 or a 125 and everything in between those motorcycles, they kind of have the same peak RPMs. So a 65 peaks right around 11, maybe 11.5, an 85 right around 11, 11.5, 125 right around 11, 11.5. That's right where peak power's at. Sometimes peak torque's maybe 500 RPM before that, just right before it. And that has to do with a whole bunch of things with resonances. And so like 2-strokes rely on resonances, and it just so happens that particular RPM really works well with port timings and things like that. So that's why they're all around there. But 252 strokes are right closer to 8,000. That's peak power. So people think you hop on a 252 stroke and, you got to rev its tits off. It's a 2-stroke. All my buddies who've ridden 4-strokes for a while, then hop back on them, over rev them initially. And they're like, man, this thing's a dog. I'm like, you need to shift 2 times from where you're at, and then you'll be in the power. And then they do that. I'm like, oh, man, it's got some balls to it. You're like, yeah, but they're like, but you really got to short shift it. It doesn't really rev. I expected the 2-stroke to rev. And I'm like, no, the 4-strokes actually on that side really do, where like a 450, it'll rev to 11.5, maybe 12,000. Yeah. So it's totally
spread.
Yeah.
I'm just saying from 8 to 12.5.
Yeah. Imagine you're adjusting yourself to that, right? So the 2-stroke really is not even close. So yeah, those are the windows. In a perfect world, on a 125, a 65, an 85, you would we've done this with shift lights, and I'm trying to get this product out. It'll happen sooner or later. We're going to have an idiot light at some point to help you train. And it's just going to flash when it's time to shift. We have a product that works, but we're struggling with RPM consistency, like getting it to pick up. I don't want to make it invasive, so I just want it to bolt on and work. Yep, we're working on that. So we've set that at 12.5 on a 125 for a kid. And if you do it on the dyno, you really wanted to shift that bike really closer to like 12.2. So that's a 300 RPM increase on that, right? That's even a little bit beyond. And the first time he rode the bike, he's a fast Loretta's kid, top 20 finishes, I think top 10 finishes. He's like, there's no way I can shift that early. I'm like, oh, yes, there is. He's like, I don't know, man. That's really early. And I'm like, trust me. So he goes out and starts, and he's like, holy hell, this thing hauls ass, but I'm shifting all the time. And I'm like, yeah, because you're going faster and faster. And he's like, but you're going faster. He's like, I didn't know the bike would pull that. They've just been so conditioned to just until it won't pull anymore, then you shift. Well, that's when you shift and you shift at 13.5, you go to on a 125, it's about 1,000 RPM drop, or an 85 or 65. That's about that drop. It goes to 12.5, and the power curve goes, let's say 10,000, 11,000 peak, 11.5, and then 12, 12.5, and then like 13 is like down here. And when you shift from 13 and back to 12, you never get back up to your peak. So you're already out of the power. You know what I mean? And so you just lose out. And you see this with starts all the time. If a kid hangs second gear just this much too long on a start, you will lose a start every single time. If you get second gear right on that money, and then you get third right on that money, all of a sudden your whole shots just start getting night and day better. And so we've done drag, like I said, we told you this on the show. Go drag race your bike with your buddies, go drag it with your friends, go drag race your bike with your whoever your competition, if they'll let you do it, on just not a whole shot, a straight up drag race, right? We're not doing a starting stop. We're just roll racing, and we're going to learn our bikes. We're trying to beat each other, but we're also trying to be fair, start at the same time, and figure out where we need to shift. And you will find very quickly that if you hang a gear on a two-stroke, we're talking 100 RPM too much in those drag races, and your buddy doesn't, he'll pull you and you'll never get it back. And then he'll pull you and you'll never get it back. And so there's a whole lot to just being on time. And I think in the pro world, like to bring this full circle, sorry for the long soliloquy.
This is really so much meat on the bone. I'm really loving this, because I'll explain why here in a second.
I say, so sorry for my soliloquy, but the four strokes will make power to the end. They can rev endlessly. And nowadays at the pro level, those bikes, they can do that. They pull all the way up there. They're not giving up an inch to do that. However, what they're giving up is durability, reliability, right? And these are pro bikes that get torn down every week. We're not talking, and sometimes it has happened this year between motos. Oh, wow, that motor got beat up. Let's put another one in there. And that happens all the time. So they can get away with it. But on the two-stroke side, even if it were pro, they would not get away with this. And you just got to go back and watch old footage and watch the best that ever did it. Go watch James ride a 125, who hardly ever used the clutch and never over revved it. Watch him ride. His bike sounds just like you would say lugged nowadays, but it's right in the meat of the power, because James was a savant with that. I actually think he was the best ever ride a 125. I think there's no question on that. And I think it was because that was one of his skill sets, was just on time shifting, carrying crazy corner speeds so he didn't have to clutch, all these factors, and he just got the most out of that bike. So yeah, but that's it. So if you could go work on that stuff, people would be blown away. It's just that 100 RPM window being the difference between a whole shot or not, or drag race win or not. And you'll be, here's what parents really need to, like, how much power. I always say, okay, we're behind on power. Okay. Well, if you start doing some math on this, if you have 10 more horsepower than your competition, so 10 more, there's nobody out there has 10 more horsepower than competition in any of these competitive classes. It's not happening. The best bike to worst bike in pro racing, factory to factory, I guarantee you is less than 2 horsepower, and it's probably 1.
Wow.
Right. Star Racing to call it, who's the worst factory team right now? I wouldn't even know. Like, there's not a Suzuki factory, I heard. So yeah, let's call it Triumph, right? And Triumph has had great starts, but they have had some phenomenal starts. Let's say Triumph is 2 horsepower off of Star, and I bet that's accurate. They probably are. That's not much. So if you start doing the math, for me to pull you over the course of 3 gear shifts, to me to pull you a legitimate 2 bike lengths would take about 10 horsepower. That's a lot of difference. That's a 250F to 450, right? And you can go do that test. Go get a 250F, go get a 450, start in second gear and drag race it out. And what you'll find is that all the way until the 250 runs out of RPM, it gets to the end quicker. The gear, the bike's tighter. It'll be so close to that 450, you'd be blown away. And we both know, and anybody who has a brain on their shoulders knows, that a stock 250F makes nowhere near the realm of horsepower that a stock 450 makes. They're generally 15 to 20 horsepower off. So maybe 10, but 15 to 20 horsepower off. And yet, yeah, he'll beat you, but he'll only beat you by a bike and a half. He's not going to beat you. If you start measuring the bike lanes, you'll be like, wow. I mean, yeah, he pulled me. It's obvious he pulled me. He's in front of me, but it's not like he put 10 bike lengths on me. So if you're bitching about horsepower at the track and you're like, oh, I got pulled by 2 bikes down that straightaway, you did not do it because of horsepower. Something else went on, traction, grip, whatever. Or you may be riding a stock Suzuki and some guy's got a mod rocket ship like we build. Okay, certainly. I'll hear you out when you say that, right? You're down at 37 horsepower and that bike's at 50. Okay, we'll talk about it, right? But if you got a good bike, if you have a bone stock KTM, like you're not giving up more than 5 to anybody on the track, So
Yeah, but I think you bring up a real important point though. We watch the pro guys and then we try to look at our bike, compare it to how the pros are doing it. And like you're saying, the margin is nominal. It's the misapplication, the misgearing or the misshifting and blah, 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 blah that gives it the bigger gap. It's not whether you're bringing a fire breathing dragon to a stock bike. It's a lot more less than that. If that's
well, anyway, so the athlete that's here, and I hope hopefully one of these days we'll hook you guys up together. Kid's fast, so we'll see what he makes of it, but he's pretty damn fast. Yeah, I'm out of Canada, so I'm giving him a big compliment because there's no fast Canadians. So, I'm just kidding, just messing with those guys. But
I love it.
I'm Canadian, by the way, so people don't know that. But we have 2 motor packages that he has, and one's a little better than the other one. And he thinks that the lesser one is better than the good one. That's been all year long. We've been fighting that. And I'm like, I'm pretty confident that this other one's a little better, dyno wise and the parts and pieces we're doing. Like we just work, it's just more steps, right? It's just got more stuff to it. And finally, I think he had a little breakthrough. Like he turned on traction control with the Git and put it onto a level, which essentially slows your bike down. It's, it does it more complicated than that, but essentially slows your bike down. And he's like, oh, that's better. What? We know that it slows it down. Like I know that it's, but I think what we and his dad have had a long discussion, and it's entirely possible that he's spinning the tire a little bit more, causing a whole lot of headache. And then all his muscle memories developed more around the other package because that's what he's ridden a lot more hours on. And so then how much you hit the gas and your technique and all these things, it, all ties together. And it's this really weird. It's very weird to be in a position where I might think that a 250F might have a little bit too much. Let's say it's too much in the mid-range, whatever it is. I would never think that that's even possible, right? But it really is. And so it's pretty wild to think that, okay, it got better with a little bit power taken away, right? So it makes you rethink some of the things that you're working on. I mean, I have no doubt. Like our super minis, I mean, I'll just say it. Like I used to not, we're going to publish a video actually on one of them here probably soon, but like we're about 36 horse on a 112, 35, 36. I've had a couple on here that have touched 37. And just for reference, like mid 90s 125s on my dyno, like 90s, like anything all the way up to 2000s, there's plenty of those that don't make 30 stock, right? So we're talking bikes that in race trim, in supercross era, we're making 34, 35, 36, right? As a full factory race bike. And these super minis nowadays, these KTMs are ridiculous. But I don't see a lap time improvement on most of the bikes from a 105 making 30, a good one, decent one, may a little more than that, to a 112 that's making this. The kids very rarely go faster. And that's just, the dads are convinced it's power. It's like, well, you've got a lot more. I think there's just, the kid only goes how fast he knows how to go. Plus, I also think personally, when I ride those bikes, I think they're death defying. Like for my size, and I'm not that big, but like how tall you are, the short wheelbase, and they just wheelie machines. You can't get and you cannot grab gears fast enough from like second, third, fourth. The bike is just gone, right?
Yep.
And so, because it was geared this tight to be around an 85, it was not geared to make 36 horse. It was geared to make 24 horsepower. Yep. Right. So that's why 450s and 250Fs race together, because they take all this power the 450 has and they spread it out through gearing. So your 450 will go 100 miles an hour if you go through 50 or tops, where your 250F might go 70. Right. But then it brings that 250F way closer to the 450 in acceleration rate. That's what gearing does. So it doesn't add power, but it condenses your power or spreads your power out. So, yeah, like you said, there's a lot to it. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, right?
Well, but that's what this podcast is all about, is you do a very good job of articulating. You just can't say this motor is better than this motor. You can't say that this bike's slower than this bike. You can't say this guy's always faster than this. It is the nuances of knowing how to shift. I'm sure that if we put James Stewart on a 2-stroke today, he still would be hyper competitive against other 2-stroke riders, right?
Yep.
Because like you said, that knack. I really, really am intrigued by the idea that you've got that indicator that tells them when to shift. And because of the Netflix special, Michaela and I have kind of gotten into the Formula One, even though it's a couple of years behind, but you get to see the nuances of the team and the drivers and the marketability and these engines. And of course, Netflix is doing a television program, right? So if they're following Haas or they're following Red Bull or they're following Alpine or whoever it may be, it's pretty cool when you look at the idea that, all right, they made a few changes. But the reason why I bring up Formula One in the example that you just used was, isn't it interesting when you watch that camera that's over the driver's head? If you look at the steering wheel, green light, red light, right? Shift. And then you can see it go up the little color scheme and it's getting orange, and you better shift. And they don't wait till it hits red,
Right.
because
They're on the
that's
money.
when they know they're going backwards.
Right.
Why, like you said, you've been trying to get it, perfected.
Yeah.
Like you say, you want to make sure it's really correct. Boy, what a great device, because those guys, everything is happening so fast. They can't really, they're driving off their peripheral. They're looking at colors below them, whether they're upshifting or downshifting. It's brilliant.
It's in it, and it's in every other form of racing, right? Like dirt bikes is so tough because it's hard to watch. It's a good,
Certainly.
right? We'll be able to add it for training, but on race day, it's not going to be functional, but you're going to have to teach yourself. And I think the drag race thing is the answer. People just need to do it more often, and they should do it versus their own bikes. Just kind of get like with your brother, your sister, your dad, even like if you're an 85, go drag race at 125. And if you really nail your shifts and you weigh less and the bike weighs less, right, you might win more often than you think. And so then you might say, wow, I mean, I'm that guy's way faster than me, but I can beat him in this just straight drag race, which means there's no excuse for me not to be able to be a lot closer to him in lap time. I mean, there's actually no doubt. I years ago, back when I rode and was riding local pro class, I had a 125 that I was just, it's a long story. I quit riding for a long time, got back into it. Right. So I had fun. So I had a 125. I rode a lot. There's a local fast kid in the area we did work for, and he was really fast. And there's a lot of other really fast kids out there. This kid was really good, right? Top 10 Loretta's kid. I got to ride with him all the time. And at certain tracks in the area on his stock Yamaha 85, and I had my stock YZ125, I could not beat the kid. Right? Like flat out. And I was riding local pro class, and it was a little tighter tracks, ones that were like a little bit tighter, more ruddy and turny. He could turn like nobody's business and was really good, but I wouldn't pull him anywhere. Right. There's a couple of tracks in there at the time that had long straightaways where I'd click fifth or sixth gear on this 125 and down that whole straightaway on this little stock 85 and versus, so back then, like YZ125 on my dyno at that time frame was 33 horse. And that 85 was like 17 or something like that. Right. Like 16, 17, 18. But because of the weight, because of his weight, because of the gearing, right? Like you wouldn't pull an inch on him down the entire straightaway. And it was a lot of fun, right? You get to battle with this kid because he's a top level kid. And so that's super awesome. And it's a wake up call, right? You're like, damn, this kid's so fast,
Yep.
When he got on super minis, couldn't keep up. The bike had that extra 10 horsepower, let's call it. And just, I had nothing for him because he was already better in the turns, right? So now I'm not catching him anywhere. But that's something that you got to keep in mind. Like if you're chasing just go look at the lap times of Loretta's, go look them at Ponca, go look at the fastest 65 there, and then go look at like the mid-pack C125 kid. Probably the 65's faster. And then for sure, by the time they get to 85s, 85 juniors, the fastest 85 junior kid at Loretta's is turning some heaters, right? Like that kid rips. So and I hear this all the time, oh, you're down on horsepower, that's why we're losing. Well, then how come there's some kid in some class here on a bike that's got 20 less horsepower than you have, turning your lap time or better? I don't want to hear it until you're faster than every single bike that's below your bike, right? So if there's some 125 kid at this track going faster than you are, I don't care who built that bike. It's not faster than your 250F.
And I think that's the important part is it's not who builds the bike. It's the rider that rides the bike.
100%.
I can't emphasize that enough. It's one of the tricks that we do with our performance camps that I put together is I bring out a radar gun, and I've got a couple tricks not really a trick. It's just, as I said on the show previous, I'm not an ex-pro, never was in a factory rig as a rider, but I know enough about riding motorcycles, and then I integrate that with the physiology. Whenever we put performance camps together, I will show you how to become faster on a dirt bike. And the way that I always validate it is with a radar gun. And all of a sudden people are like, wow. And it is exactly what you said. It feels slower. Well, this is where you have to remove emotion and go off of the reality of, and I liked what you said, you're not going to race with the device that's going to, teach you how to shift gears when, but it's internalizing that. Like we're very big on the Garmin's, and we do days that we'll go to the track. We'll have them wear the watch. We'll just turn it to where they can't see it. And then give me your perceived 80% effort. And let's compare it against the actual 80% heart rate. How close are we? We're trying to internalize what it feels like to be at 80%, 90%, 100%. That's something that a lot of the listeners don't realize. They think that they're close to 100. I've seen that gap be off by over 35%. 35%.
That's a huge amount.
Off.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount. And so when, like to your point exactly, you can have somebody who's in really good shape, but physically, and this is where I want to kind of segue back over to the physical side, to your point, there's a lot of people who think that they're at their submaximal effort. Well, until you put a number on it, you're most of the time not even remotely close to it. And people go, oh, that's hogwash. Well, let me explain why. When you, let's just take a percentage of 90% of 90% of maximal effort. What people don't realize is you have to teach your body how to dissipate heat at a 90% effort. You have to teach yourself how to deliver enough sugar at 90% effort. That's digestion. You have to be able to wick away heat quickly enough through sweat. Now, think about what you were talking about earlier. You've got a motor that has the potential on a dyno, if shifted correctly, to produce X amount of power. But behind the scenes and underneath everything is fuel consumption, conversion of air, fuel, like you said, the mixture of oil, the whole 9 yards to keep it not only just getting there once, but maintaining it. Now look at the parallel. If you don't train yourself with an accurate percentage of maximum, you don't teach yourself how to dissipate metabolic waste, be able to convert sugar into energy, dissipate heat, right? Radiator, fuel, oil in the engine casings. If I go and I take an oversized carburetor and I stuff it on a smaller, I always use the example, if I take a 125 carburetor and I stuff it on an 85, it isn't going to make that piston all of a sudden produce more power.
Right.
And vice versa. Right.
Right.
So that's the whole idea is it's like, well, you think that you're at a submaximal effort. Let's say that's the effort that's necessary to win Loretta's at 20 minutes. Well, but how much time have you familiarized yourself with that to dissipate heat, deliver sugar, dissipate metabolic waste? Well, what configuration do you have with radiator size, piston, carb, stroke bore, kit, the whole 9 yards, and its ability to be shifted at the right time to get the peak horsepower?
And think about like what you're saying on the body side. That's what training is. Physiologically, you're training and your neurological system, whatever it is, is actually learning how to do what you just described. Right? It's saying, okay, we got to do all these things that's why you get more efficient, or when you go to the gym and you lift or you ride or you work out or you get cardio, it's like, it's literally working on those systems until they know how to do that. And then they can do it better and better and better. The same thing applies, like the engine. We do our best. Our side is to optimize that version for the engine, how much air can get in, how much air can get out, what air and fuel go into it. What's the viscosity of the oil? Can we go thinner? Can we go thicker? Like little odds, little details. And then those are like the nuances, but like, that's like, fine tuning a really well-built athlete is the last little details. Right. So then the last bit of it though, and the part that we can't control and you can't control per se is like, okay, he's fit. The bike's fast enough, whether it's the fastest or not, let's call it. It is. Let's say you have everything right. Great suspension, great bike. The kid likes it, whatever. But then he doesn't go out and execute the riding side of it. Not just, they don't shift at the right time. Race day comes and out come bad habits, right? Now, it doesn't matter what you put under them. They're not going to win. And that's where you have to develop and train. So I think there's all sorts of aspects. There's fitness training. There's times where what you do when you coach is not particularly enjoyable. It's purely for fitness. We have to do this just because I need to be fit. And there's times when you should be training on your motor. I'm not saying as a riding coach, but I think riding coaches should be doing this. There's times where your training blocks should be on how to ride the bike, not just technically correctly. Okay, your arms, your elbows, your head, but also correctly riding the RPM range and the gear shift position and the motorcycle correctly, optimizing what you get out of the motorcycle. Me and a client had this talk yesterday, and we have it all the time. Every time he calls, great guy. And I think hopefully he's in your email list now. I think we were talking about that. Hopefully that's all sorted out. He's really good about this because he's very analytical. So he's like, anytime they're trying to switch between platforms of bikes, that's why they don't want to switch between multiple platforms of bikes. They're kind of sticking with one because like, man, that bike, that Super Mini versus that 85, they deliver power differently. And my kid has really, some kids can, some kids can't. He just really struggles to redo what he knows how to do to hop on a totally different feeling bike or a different power character. So we just don't ride them, right? That's something that needs to be coached. And I think people need to understand that is if your kid is hopping between all these different versions of bikes, well, either they can do it correctly, or what I think happens is that you give a kid all this more horsepower and he's been riding on the stock bike a whole lot. All of a sudden, what becomes the crux to slow down the horsepower when they don't need it? And it's a clutch.
Yep.
Because they've already trained the throttle what to do. So this is how much I give it and when I give it. All of a sudden, it's a little more and I don't need that. Well, I just do this. Well, guess what happens when you do this? It takes all that horsepower that the engine is making and it slips it away through friction into heat. And on a 4-stroke, that heats straight into your oil. And that oil is what is the lifeblood of your engine. right? And it goes through and then if you get it hot enough, it destroys parts. So to give you an example, we had an engine that came in, lost a crank. I think originally text I saw it's like 7 hours since it had been built. And very rare on KTM, actually, very rare to lose a rod bearing. It's what it lost. I mean, almost never have you seen on a KTM. I think I've had one other rod bearing failure that I've personally had come through the shop in the last, and this is race equipment, right? If somebody takes a bike 400 hours on a KTM, I'll probably, we probably replaced a crank, but crank. But so out of however many we do, which is a heck of a lot, and how many customers we touch and how many people we know and how many rebuilds come in the shop, I think I've seen 2 in 10 years on this design, right? 2. And when I start digging into the engine, I'm like, man, that sucks. Well, what's going on here? All the bolts are tight and the parts are right. And they're all new stock OEM parts. This is basically, pretty much a stock engine.
Yeah.
So what I did notice, first sign, which was like I'm tearing it apart. I didn't even know the rod bearing was bad initially. It turned over fine. Piston was fine. It didn't even look bad. Anyway, the clutch plates were blackened and golden, like the steels, right? And then on top of that, I've never seen this before. This was like a mind-blowing moment, is there are portions of the clutch basket, and the KTM have a steel basket. So you would see this on steel. You can't see it on aluminum. It was blue, like a heated blue, right? And I saw that and I'm like, huh. So I Googled it real quick. I know that's hot, but I don't know how hot that is. That's 550 degrees before steel blues. Whoa. Well, your engine, your water boils at 220, a little higher than that with pressure, but right, 220. I'm like, well, that's freaking hot. Well, we all know that when the clutch is actually in the moment, the heat of the battle slipping, it's going to get way, really high localized temperatures. But that means we got to heat up everything around it. So the oil gets hot and the cases get hot. So it takes a long time for everything else, right, to get to that temperature. So you're going to have these crazy hot moments. But, as long as the oil stays within its operating window, you're okay. But clearly, that amount of heat got transferred over to the basket, a whole nother entity, and it got blued, right? And then, the whole motor stank. The oil stank like crazy. So then on top of that, there's one of our HP stickers was on the valve cover. And it's at the very top of the engine on the external of the engine, right? And there's no ink on it. It was done. The sticker was cooked. And I'm like, it's a sticker. I've hit him with a torch by accident and caught him on fire. And, it's not that hard to do, right? I'm like, I wonder how, well, I said, I'm really curious on this engine. So I put it on a piece of metal and I stuck it in a little convection oven. I used the heat cases up to drop bearings in them. And I started ratcheting up the heat 200, which is most water temperatures on a dirt bike around 200, just FYI. So if you're sub 200, you're probably had a good day. And if you're over 200, you probably overheated. 250. 300, sticker still good. 350, sticker still looks brand new. 400 degrees and it finally turned colors. And I'm like, all the way at the top, away from the clutch, on the outside of the engine where there's ambient air. So it's
400 degrees.
400 degrees. I just was mind blown, right? So then I call my dad. I'm like, Dad, I know a lot about oil, but I don't know everything about oil. Like, walk me through how this bearing works. And this is what I think happened. I think the oil got to at least 300. I think it got hotter than that. I think it's pretty obvious it did. But let's just say it got to 300 and, whatever. And this is, these bikes they don't have a bearing. They have an oil film as a bearing on this bike. It's a very reliable method. And we're talking about viscosities. Of course, oil gets hotter, it gets thinner. Everybody knows that, right? Well, you basically had a great analogy, and I think it's the one I would use on the show, which is why you don't want to overheat your bikes and why you don't want to cook your bikes and why heat is detrimental and why at the factory level, if a motor gets overheated and they have their determining factors for that, everything gets thrown in the trash. The cases, it's junk. The team will never rerun that. It's truly junk. They just throw it away. And that's because it gets so hot. Some of the heat treat can go away, right? And some of these parts are no longer as strong as they should be because they have a limit, right? These parts are all heat treated. So long and short, he had a good analogy. He said, if I take molasses or honey, put it on a table and drop a cup down on it, it's not going to hit the table, right? There's going to be a wedge of honey. But if I do real, real thin hydraulic oil or I do like water and I drop the cup down on the table, it's going to go right through it and hit the table. Well, if it hits the table, your part fails, right? So when that oil gets super, super, super hot, it gets super, super, super thin. On top of that, most petroleum oils start breaking down, or all synthetics around 300 degrees, like all their qualities start burning off and going away. Like I put the oil in the oven. What's the oil look like at these temperatures? And I went 200, 250, 300, 350. And about 300, it starts to smoke. About 350, it really starts to smoke. And about 400, I was like, I'm not going any farther than that. I think I'm going to light my whole shop on fire. So I turn it off. It's, smells like all hell and smoke was coming out of the thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's not good. So But I swirled it around at 150, 200, 250. And this is not a real viscosity test, but you can just swirl it around and just see what it looks like. And I mean, at about 300 degrees, it's way, way thinner than water, right? I mean, it's just moving around. Water's got way more viscosity to it. So that's why heat's detrimental. That's why you got to stay off of that clutch, because the number one heat builder in your engine is your clutch. It's not the engine. The engine can be managed on temperature, no problem. The radiators can do it. The coolant system can do it. That's what the engineers size their engine to do. You could put it on the dyno, and I could put it at wide open power, full throttle, forever. And until the parts eventually time out, which would be more than 24 hours on the dyno, probably 100 hours, the bike would go, and it would never overheat so long as I had about 30 miles an hour of, effective wind speed, right?
Sure.
But the second you start slipping that clutch and start cooking that oil and start getting that temperature up, the radiator systems only can take so much, and they can't, if you convert all of that horsepower heat that's already being generated into the engine. So, that's how power is made. We make heat, but then you convert a lot. So you make all this power, and then we got to pull that heat out of the engine through the coolant and exhaust system. But then we slip that heat purely into the clutch. So we take all that horsepower, and then we slip it. So we build twice as much heat. Instead of the horsepower going to the rear tire, the horsepower is going into your clutch, into slippage. The coolant system can't handle it. Right. And then we only have 1 quart of oil in almost all the dirt bikes. And once you heat up that oil to that temperature, which is not that much oil, right? Done. So, I mean, we've all seen it. I mean, I'm talking forever today. I apologize. Tomac.
No, it's good stuff.
When he was at the tail end of his Cowie career, was smoking clutches. And that was the huge disconnect they had. And they went to the hydraulic clutch. He didn't want it. So he didn't have a feel for when the clutch was getting hot and for when he was smoking it, because hydraulics self-adjust. When he had a cable, oh, wow, the tension's getting screwed up in my hand. I can back off my riding, which is a flaw. He shouldn't really be riding it that hard. But he's a Tomac. We can't tell him that, right? He's a pro. It's his own dick. Kenny doesn't do it, right? But whatever. Jet doesn't do it, but whatever. So he would know. But when he went to that hydraulic clutch, he wouldn't know. So he just keep slipping it and keep slipping it. And then, of course, he blamed the clutch weakness on Cowie, and Cowie's like, hey, we can tear apart a Yamaha and a KTM or whatever, and we can have those parts made if we think we need them. Like, if I were to show you all these clutches, you couldn't tell a difference. So they're the same diameter, the same amount of them, same parts. They all buy from Hinson or Recluse or whatever, right? A factory, like they can get whatever they want. But it was, in my opinion, just purely, he just wasn't able to mitigate, manage it. And I don't know what Yamaha did. I would love to know. They figured that problem out for him, right? Whatever it was, problem solved. Now, granted, they kept him on a cable clutch for quite a while. I think he's now hydraulic, or now obviously KTM, but whatever they did was phenomenal. So huge kudos to the Yamaha staff. Who knows what they did? They did some wizardry in there. But that said, if you really watched really closely, he would just kind of, sometimes these bad races he had late in his Cowie career, especially Supercross, like he's 7th. But if you really watched, he couldn't get through the whoops. The bike wouldn't have any power because the clutch was slipping. He was struggling to get jumps. He was struggling because he was slipping the clutch. And there's just proof in the pudding. I don't care what level you're at. I don't care how you do it. If you over abuse the clutch, the bikes can't take it, period. No bike on the planet can. And we saw that outdoors with Deegan this year. He'd smoked a bike, I think, what was it? Lakewood. I think he had one other round where the bike got a little hot. And that was, and then also Tomac and Webb both had engine failures early in the year. If I had to bet, they just got him a little hot. Use a little bit of clutch. It's your first round. It's deep, and then whatever part was a weak link in there, just didn't like that. And I said, I'm out, So, yeah, you got to be good about it. And the hard thing about it is an 85, a Super Indy, a 125, they almost have the same clutch as a 250F. They're very comparable. But they make way less power. So you can abuse the clutch. It's not converting as much, right? But on the 250F, you start abusing it, or the 450, and you just bike overheats.
Well, take everything that you just mentioned. You're not responsible for the law of physics, right? And so when we look at the idea here, we've talked, this would be probably the 4th or 5th show that we've briefly brought up, learn how to shift your bike. Now you're talking about, you put it in a race setting, and then you start being a little bit more clutch dependent to slow the bike down or whatever you do. Now you just purposely increase the amount of heat that's in the engine. Now, again, this is physics. It's not our opinion. It's fact. And then who are the two people that get blamed when the rider shits the bed at the race? Motor sucks and the fitness program doesn't work. Now, this isn't a woe is us, right? You and I partnered up to try to show the parity between human and motor. But like you've heard me say, I've said it on the show here, I don't make up the principles of nutrition and physiology, but I won't argue with them. You're saying the same thing. I can show you where the peak horsepower is on the dyno, if I can get you to learn how to shift in, like you said, that young rider that's like, no way, that bike won't pull that low. You're like, trust me, it will. And he comes back and what does he say? Wow, Derek, you were correct. Well, you didn't make it up. It's based on mathematical calculations, physics. You can't argue with it. Now, I wish we had 1 million listeners every month, right? So because we have such small number, when I say small, I'm very proud of our numbers, 300-400 people that watch and listen to these. I'm thankful for every one of you. But if you're out at a racetrack, let's say that there's 1,000 people in your class that try to qualify for Loretta's and get 42 spots. This knowledge is putting you light years ahead of everybody. If you're a young athlete or you as a vet rider, because you're a vet rider with a young athlete trying to figure out amateur motocross, I say this as respectfully as I can. Stop fighting the law of physics and physiology because we didn't make it up. If you go out, you've got a 20-minute moto at Loretta's and you go out like it's a 4 to 5 minute sprint qualifying race at your qualifiers at an area or a regional, you've applied the wrong race strategy to the race duration. The law of physics, the physiology is going to bite you in the behind. If you're sitting there triple clutching in every corner and you boil the engine or you weaken the viscosity of the bike, it grenades and or just simply slows down because of excessive amounts of heat. I think you're putting your blame in the wrong category. Now, where I always say is, if you're not knowledgeable about it, you can use that as an explanation. I'm with you 100%. But if you've been with us, this is our 20th show together. How many times, Derek, have you talked about the idea of what heat does? How many times have you said most people don't know how to shift their bikes? And now here we are, show number 20. You have a bike that came in the shop and you're still saying, why did this thing get to 500 degrees? Because you just walked this, you just reverse engineered it. You said, okay, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. The only other thing was Clutch Basket looked at it. The color dictates the temperature. Who created the temperature? The person with the 2 fingers on the clutch.
And there's no way around it. You can't build the heat any other way. I could have pulled the coolant out of the bike. If you didn't touch the clutch, you wouldn't have got it that hot. The engine would not have gotten that hot because the oil would have carried heat away at a rate fast enough to prevent it from getting, you see this in outdoors. I don't know if you've seen it, but like you'll see a bike starting to overheat and it pukes all the coolant out. And then it continues. And half the time nowadays, they generally finish a moto. Like, I don't know if you notice that, but a lot of bikes will make it to the finish line. They might limp it. And of course, that motor's junk at that level. Like, you just throw it away. But that said, it'll make it because now you have to super cook the oil to the temperature that it breaks down. So there's a thermal inertia, right? It takes time to put heat into things. But by the time like I said, I had to Google it again, or I didn't know off the top of my head, but blue's at 550. Okay, well, it's blue. It's clearly blue. Like, if your clutch plates come out and they're golden and black and all that, like, your clutch got really hot. And it's, it is. Anytime you slip it, even if you just slip it off the start a few times, it's going to get really hot in that short little moment. It's just like hitting your brakes, right? We've all touched, if you really use your brakes, your front brake rotor, it's boiling hot. It'll cook your hands. It doesn't take long for those, right, if your brake pads to get to that temperature. One long braking section and your front rotor will be untouchable. Well, guess what? Your clutch and your engine are putting out a lot of horsepower, and that exact same principle applies to those clutch materials. It's a brake pad, right? Your clutch is brake pad, and the same thing happens, and it gets really, really, really hot. So I've had this epiphany through this whole deal because I feel bad for the client, right? Like, it sucks to lose an engine, especially at such low time, and I'm always looking to improve, right? So I think what we're actually going to do, I've been seeing this more and more and more. I think the bikes have made more and more horsepower than they've ever made, which is more heat. Number one, the more power you make, the more heat you are producing. That's how horsepower is made. You can go look it up. We're going to have a video on it someday because I think it's going to be a cool video on like YouTube, just how an engine works. But the other aspect of that is clutches have not evolved in real base design really for about 20 plus years. Like a YZ250F essentially has the same fiber as a YZ125 in the 90s. Like, they interchange in size pretty much. So nothing's really evolved in there, but you know what has evolved is that YZ250F went from 30 horsepower when it first came out to 40 something when it's out now. And then the race side, right? Like I said, if we're able to push 50 plus, I know for a fact there's other shops able to push 50 plus. So now we're talking about bikes that have clutches that were designed around the 30 horsepower era that are being utilized in the 50 horsepower era, right? They're just not really evolving with the power level, but there's reasons for that. If we were to put a clutch that was bulletproof at 50 horsepower, the bike would gain weight, it would gain inertia, right? We'd have to have a bigger clutch and more parts and pieces, and it wouldn't fit in the bike as good. There's a lot of positives and negatives to these problems. And the real solution is, well, the manufacturers were thinking, well, we got all this more extra horsepower. The guy never needs a clutch. That's what they're thinking, right? And yet the rider's like, oh, I got all this horsepower. I'm just going to slip the shit out of it now, right? Like, there's a huge difference and there's a disconnect there. So, and again, techniques have changed. I see it. I go to the track limited now, but I watch all the races and I keep up with the shorts and what the kids post, what they're proud of. I think that's a great sign of what's cool and in vogue and in the industry is whatever Instagram clip a kid decides to post with himself in it tells you how he thinks he wants to be perceived.
Yeah.
Because that's their version of their best self. Gotcha. And I need to look up the kid's name. He's Vigel. He's super fast, but he rode super minis. Now he's YZ125s, and he posts clips of himself just shredding bikes. Like, the kid rips. That said, he's always on the clutch. He's always over revving. He screams the bike in every single jump, and it sounds awesome. It's great for Instagram. It gets tons of views. However, I would never coach him to ride that way. I'd be like, hey, we can do all of the things you just did speed-wise. You can hit the turn exactly the same way. You can scrub the jump exactly the same way. You can go down the straightaway exactly the same way. But when you're in the air, you don't have to hold it wide open. It doesn't make you go faster. When you're going through that corner, you don't need to hold the throttle wide open, hold in the clutch, and then hit the corner. You could just hit the gas when you decide to go through the corner. And there's other sides to that, right? Like, the Japanese think, okay, we have this thing called a throttle, and it limits power. It's either full power or it's somewhere in between. Riders think this is easy. Wide open's easy. Now let me limit the power this way. Different ways of doing it, right? The Japanese are thinking, or the Austrians are thinking, well, we put a throttle on there. If you want less power, why don't you just let off the throttle? Makes sense to me, right? But nowadays, that's just not the convention. And I don't know if this goes back to Cobra 50s, where like those, you just keep them wide open because they have I don't know. But it definitely has changed and it's here to stay. So it's my job, your job. Like, for example, it's my job to figure out how to do the best we can do to prevent problems and then educate, hey, you're pushing the limits beyond what we can do. And then number two, and your job as a trainer, okay, hey, these guys are, they got longer race seasons than ever. Amateur motocross is longer. We got to be prepared for more weekends of the year. We got to be race ready for all these events. You as a trainer get to say, hey, how do we make, it's hot in the summer. We know it's hot. So I'm going to have to tell you to do some things, right? It's our job to adapt to the conditions at hand.
You bring up something that's really, really important, and I need people to think about the differentiating variable. Let's say that a moto dad, moto mom is observing the rider, a mechanic's observing the rider themselves recognize that the bike's losing power. Literally, and I'm going to use a loose number here. Please forgive my ignorance. Let's say they come in and 30 minutes later, the bike's cool enough that they can start taking it apart. Just go with me, hypothetically, right? Well, within 30 minutes after that race is over, you can look at that clutch basket and see that it's blued and go, yep, we have an overheating issue. And the way that you reverse engineered that to isolate, you're abusing the clutch because A, not checked, B, not checked, C, not checked. When we get to the clutch basket, it's blued. It's 500 degrees. That explains why the thing grenaded. As a human performance specialist, it takes us 6 months to build something. And unfortunately, in the human performance world, once something breaks, it takes years to replace it. I'll give you a very specific example. If you're watching this show and you're craving simple sugars, if you have night sweats, if you have low libido, if you're tired and you can't sleep, you have adrenal fatigue. Now, how long does it take for us to reverse these symptoms? It could take 3 months. It could take 3 years. It could take 10 years because there's not a dipstick. There's not a measuring device that can say the severity of your adrenal fatigue is roughly 31 days. If you eat enough high quality fat, you get enough sleep, you stay hydrated, you get enough deep sleep every night, we can reverse those symptoms, but I don't have the ability to I can't pull your adrenals out of your chest and go, yeah, they're blued. They've been overheated. They've been smoked. That's what makes human performance so difficult because, like you just said, you didn't make up the world of physics, right? There's been enough research that's been done that says when the temperature hits 500 degrees, this is what happens to metal, oil, etc. All the examples that you gave. When I say to you, when you run a calorie deficit of more than 100 to 150 calories for X period of time, the 100% guaranteed byproduct of that is going to be a condition known as relative energy deficiency, right? You get the temperature to 500, this clutch basket's going to turn blue. When you run a deficiency in calories, you get a condition known as relative energy deficiency. So when you eat 2,000 calories and you go out and you burn 4,000 calories, 5,000 calories, the body got enough what it needed to go ride, go cross train, go to work, go to school, do all the obligations. But then when it comes time to recover at night, that deficit of calories leaves the body nothing to rebuild itself. So now I'm going to kind of draw your analogy with your hand, Eric. You've hit a peak and now you're on the downside. The problem is I don't have a dyno report that I can hook you up to every night. Now, ironically, we do. It's called the Garmin.
Right.
But if I don't see the resting heart rate staying, this is a bunch of double negatives that equals a positive. How do I validate to you, Derek, as an end athlete? Are you recovering sufficiently for the work that you did today? Well, I'll look at resting heart rate. Now let's use a double negative. If the resting heart rate is not stable or lower, there's only one other direction it can go. That's up, which is a sign of stress. If I see that your HRV, heart rate variability, if I see that that starts to waver, if I see that your body battery is not bouncing back, if I see some maybe not so obvious things that are measurable on Garmin, maybe you're waking up and you don't have much of an appetite, suppressed appetite. What if you wake up, you're a little bit irritable? Not something Garmin measures, but you notice that you're a little bit short-tempered, right? Always go back and draw an analogy with an infant. If an infant is underfed or under-rested, they're very cranky. So we come back to the whole idea, if you bring it back full circle, the problem that you run into with physiology is it's just as absolute as a motor. It just doesn't look it. So for example, you run out of gas, what happens? You're parked on the side of the track, pretty straightforward. Well, if you burnt 3,000 calories and only took in 2, you don't just all of a sudden stop. You're able to still function, and that's what makes you dangerous. You talk about the idea that the radiators, you get a small leak in your radiator. The athlete will recognize that the motor's losing power. You're going to pull off before it finally locks up. Why? Because you can sense that their power is just not there. Well, if you're not paying attention to your arms and maybe you can't see it because your jersey's covering it, you may be on the verge of dehydration, not see it or feel it until it's too late, right? All of a sudden you get a severe cramp or you get cotton mouth or you get some of these external signs that there's an internal problem. The problem is it's not absolute, right? The body will still continue to adapt until it can't. Think about the external signs of dehydration. You'll stop sweating, you might get cotton mouth, you might start to get some muscular cramps. Eventually your head feels like it's got a frying pan on it. Well, when you get to that 4th stage of dehydration, you're doing damage. It's exactly like a motorcycle. If you feel the motor's losing power, right? You mentioned it earlier. What was it they put on the board for Deegan? Slow down, back off, save the clutch, finish the moto, whatever. Well, you've got your body can't dissipate heat. Your internal core temperature goes up. And I want you to think about how vicious this cycle is. You start a moto and you're dehydrated. The demands, you're out there racing. The demands that you're putting on the muscle, the demands of the muscle need sugar and they need water. The sugar, muscle contraction, and the sugar feeds your brain, depth perception. Well, you're going super fast, so you're draining your gas tank quicker. Well, because you're going so fast, you're sweating more, so you're dehydrating yourself at a faster rate. You see the vicious cycle that you're running into? You started dehydrated, you burnt more calories because you're going fast, you're burning and dissipating more water. Well, guess what? Now that you're dehydrated, the heart rate goes up because the oxygen demands are still there. There's less water in the blood, so it artificially elevates. So now you're swimming in a circle real quick. The problem is you know that you're starting to feel some issues here, but you're thinking, I can push through it. And this is, and I say this totally tongue in cheek. If you pushed yourself to the point of dehydration and it cost you $5,000, you probably wouldn't push through dehydration. Because when we sense that the motor is letting go, what's first thing, especially if it's not a high profile race, what do? You
And that
off the track.
Right. And I think that is an area of lacking where nowadays kids are not in tune with their bike. They just ride them till they grenade. And nowadays kids, I thought a little something was up, but they've been told to map. I am not a fan of finishing moto at all costs.
Agreed.
There are certain costs that are not worth paying.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, if I tell people all the time, if you're new to Loretta's, new to amateur nationals, trying to get your feet wet, you should try to finish every single lap you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Track experience. But that's not at all costs. That's okay. I might be last and that might be the pace I have, but I'm going to ride every lap and I'm going to get better all week. Or I might be 20th or I might be 10th, but I'm not going to crash. I'm going to see every time that track's available for me to ride that I signed up for. I want to get my laps in. Right. But I see it all the time. Let's just say in amateur racing in 5 laps, if it's a 5-lap race, right? And you crash and it's slow to get up and it was a good one, right? Or you got tangled up, you can't get the bike started, whatever. On one side, I do think you should maybe go out and get your laps in. You paid your laps, right? But if you're like a lap down or close to a lap down or 35, 40 seconds back and you're a contender, you're not. Absolutely not in 5 laps. Loretta's a different story. In 5 laps, you are not going to come back to first. So if you're beat up, you're hurt, your bike's tweaked, and all these factors, there's no honor, in my opinion, of finishing this moto. There's nothing to win, and there's a lot more to lose. Maybe you rang your bell a little bit. Maybe your hands hurt. Maybe your body's not right. Maybe you're just not 100%. What are you going to win if you're going to go out and ride your ass off and you come back to last? Oh, you didn't get any positions and you rode great. You set fastest laps on the track, right? Like that was awesome, but in 5 laps time. So to me, it's the same with engines. There's times where the engine is just not, okay, something's up here. Is it in my head? No, it's not in my head. Okay, what's it worth to you? Do you want a grenade? Do you want to go over a jump? Do you want to land? And to what's it worth to your engine? If you catch it early enough, it might be a simple, quick, cheap fix.
That's right.
But if you let it go to its completion, it could be an entire engine. And so that's one of those things that in it just, to me, I just never understood that. And I don't see me and you have been at this long enough now. I hate to say this because I wasn't, I've gotten slighted by the industry, you would call it, over the years, but there is no single amateur race in the country, in my opinion, that's worth losing at all costs or winning at all costs. Because nowadays the winning is not, you don't win much. You could go win amateur national championships and it's not a guarantee at a ride if you only do it once, right? So realistically, that plan needs to be the long-term goal, like you talk about all the time. What's your vision? I want to be successful at every amateur national that I decide to go to. And it's like showing up to an amateur national, not 100%. There's actually an athlete we were trying to get on board this year, and I really wish he had done it. And I, wish him the best. It didn't work out. He didn't do it. He came up to Loretta's this year, underprepared. He got 4th, 5th, something like that. I don't recall what he got. He won last year, right? And didn't get a deal out of it. Last year, okay, maybe you win again. We maybe give you a deal, right? Oh, you got 4th, 5th? Okay, you're no longer on our radar anymore. And he knew going into Loretta's he wasn't 100%. He was hurt all year, was a little bit hurt coming to Loretta's, wasn't 100% fit. All these factors have been adding up all year long. Not enough training time, not enough seat time, shoulder injury, right? Like a recurring injury.
Yeah.
And then you still decide to go to Loretta's. Now, I get it. If you just want to go, we talked about this. You like going to Loretta's? Hey, good for you. You don't care about getting 4th? Good for you. If this isn't where you need your income to pay off in life, like your family's got money, good. Go to Loretta's. Hey, man, that's awesome. That's a sweet week. But if this is really where you want to cut your teeth, he probably would have been better sitting on the couch at home watching Loretta's than going out there and putting out a 4th place, because that's the last result he has on paper. And now the kid's super talented and he's smart. The family's good. So we'll see what, hopefully next year's a rebound year for him. But is it really worth it? And then would it have been worth finishing a moto after a crash if he's went out and got 5th, 6th, 10th, 12th? I just don't think it is. And the same with the motor. If your motor's really clearly got some serious issues going on, or it's, for example, you see this all the time. Somebody didn't wash the bike right, water in the carburetor, sputtering out there on the track, running like dog shit. And the kid finishes the whole moto and he does terrible. And then he's like, oh, the bike and whatever. And the dad's like, oh, I don't. It's like, you knew you were going to do terrible because the bike couldn't go. It was sputtering the entire moto. Is there any honor in that? Like, I just don't understand it. Like, go back, get your bike right, get it prepped, sort out your issue, and then go out and attack the track to your best of your ability. Because if the bike is dangerous, it's not worth riding.
Well, and you've mentioned it numerous times. You've even mentioned it here today. The bikes are faster. We complain about it all the time, right? The level of injuries are at an all-time high because the bikes are so damn fast. The tracks are so fast. So then you add the fast bikes, it's not running correctly, but you still think you can try to ride it. And then when it does yard dart you and ragdoll you down the track, you had nobody to blame but yourself. Now, I will take this a step further. I'm very fortunate, like Luca Medica, 125 Yamaha rider. He got a chance to do designations. What I love about them as a family is the mom and dad have created an environment that they trust what the rider says. So the rider has a safe environment to come in and say, I don't feel like the motor's running well. His dad's not saying, suck it up, buttercup. You're ridiculous. This is absurd. Then on the flip side, the riders never blamed the bike as a reason why we can't win. So the parent, when the rider says, hey, the bike's not performing correctly, the parent trusts what the rider said and the rider feels safe that he can say something, that's the environment that you desperately need. I
You have to have a
personally
winning
think
environment. Yeah.
yeah, I think at a factory level, this is what Lars does at Honda. Plain and simple. If Jed or Hunter aren't comfortable or Joe's not comfortable with something, Lars has created an environment. We'll figure it out instead of saying it's you. You're the problem.
I totally agree. And I think it's that, I had a kid, I told you this years ago, and this is when I was young. I wouldn't have never done it nowadays. I just wouldn't have the patience. Although I probably would. I love the kid. He was a great kid. If you get on my good side, I'll go to bat for you, right? And so if you give me 100%, I'll give you 100%, like no question. And the kid was awesome. And he was really hard to deal with in the sense that, like, he was really hard on his crew around him after races, even a young. And I say crew, now I say that. Back then it's just, it's hard on his dad. He's hard on you. He's hard on this. But if there's a little issue, he was like the worst to be around, right? All mad and throwing stuff. But he slowly, Chase Sexton said he had to learn how to do this. I don't know if he has or he hasn't, but the kid did learn very rapidly. Like, if he wants to, to rally the troops, he can be hard on you. Hey, man, bike's not running great. Something's up today. But when it's right, he's like, dude, bike's awesome. We're dialed. Okay, good. Let's go race. And then you could trust him because it wasn't always a bad day, right? He's like, nope, bike's dialed. Or, for example, I sucked that moto, dude. Bike was great. You come in, he didn't have the moto he's supposed to have. You think the bike's good. You prepped good. You trained good. His last 3 months have been great. And you show up and the kid lays a goose egg. And for him, right, it's supposed to be whatever it's supposed to be. And you come in there, hey, man, can I help you with the suspension? It looked like it was kicking a little bit over there, and maybe we can change the jetting. And he goes, no, dude, bike's great. I just sucked. Oh, okay. You sure you don't want any clicks? No, man, bike's awesome. I laid a goose egg out there. I'll be better next moto. That kind of approach, but you could trust him, which was okay. What about, and then the motos he came in, hey, I gave it everything I had, and he always did. That was nice. You got effort, but something's up. Like, we got to sort the bike out. It's sputtering or it didn't run good. Let's pull the top end down. Like, something's up, and then you could, okay, I trust the kid. He's not just blowing smoke up my ass or, if that's hurt, right? And so at the end of the day, that's the environment you have to have, but I have to be willing to accept it, right? Your family has to accept it. But on the flip side, the kid has to be honest, right? And that's the really big challenge out there, nowadays they use that term self-aware. I think is a weird term, but just being honest, like, hey, like you said, that's great that family can do that. Same with, like you said, at Lars. And I think you see that at all the teams that have a lot of success. Internally, they're able to have challenging conversations, but not hurtful conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have another rider, Bronx Grundy, same thing. They bought a super mini, and as soon as he was out there, and obviously this was over the course of a couple months, Bronx could just tell something wasn't right with the motor. And he comes in and his dad's like, man, they weren't arguing, but his dad's listening to him. He's like, it sounds good. It's pulling well and everything. And Bronx was like, I just really don't want to ride it. And literally they had 2 bikes. And when they got back, his dad said, sure enough, that night, he was cleaning the bike up and stuff. And he noticed that there was a split on the engine casings. And so it was sucking a little bit of air in. And like his dad said, and this is what was so cool about it. Think about this from 2 perspectives, but very important. Bronx could sense that something was wrong. The dad said it sounded good. It pulled well, but Bronx could tell just enough. So, right, it was just enough of a crack, letting a little bit of air in there that he could tell. But if he hadn't said something, his dad wouldn't have been looking for it. So it would have only gotten worse. So this is where that 2-way trust comes in. And his dad gave his son compliments. He's like, that's really cool that you could sense it, because it wasn't overt. It wasn't like just in your face. It was so subtle, but it saves grenading the motor. It saves him getting grenaded, right? Because we know that a motor is going to let go when it goes from full load to no load. And you've already got a little bit of a problem with the casings, just a little hairline crack, whatever. But again, it goes back to these kids need to learn how to recognize. People need to learn how to shift bikes, right? And when all of a sudden you know what it should do and it doesn't, you just have to ask the question why. We've talked about it on the show. There's not a client of mine that I work with. When they start a workout, they should be able to tell you what the purpose of the workout is. What's it supposed to be? What's it supposed to be?
What's my objective, the workout?
If it's addressing a weakness, they know that. If it's increasing athletic durability, they know that. They know if it's an anaerobic threshold. They know if it's an aerobic workout.
That's interesting. There's probably a psychological aspect that too, with like, what would you describe that as? That's interesting. I like that you said that.
It's the idea here that what most people don't realize is that you're getting beat by your competition exposing your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, Derek, you're a great sprinter. I'm not. So your goal is to get enough distance. You lack late race endurance. That's my strength. So your only way to beat me is get in a big enough gap and I run out of real estate. Well, all of a sudden now you are good at sprinting and you improve your late race endurance. I have nothing for you.
You're going to have to improve your sprinting, right? But I
I
think
have
there's a
to change the
psychological
way,
thing,
yeah, but I have
having
to
a
change the way
focus to
that
your
I
training,
race
right?
you.
Right. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Jet's getting free rent in everybody's head because they're trying to figure out, how do I get in front of this guy?
Right.
So when you get to the psychological side of it, when you're training and you as an athlete know that you're eliminating a weakness that other people keep exposing, not only are you getting more confident because you recognize that you're converting a weakness to a strength, but what you do recognize is when your competition, all of a sudden that aha moment hits them, they go, he's both a good sprinter and he has late race endurance. Now I'm getting free rent in your head because now you realize I have no weaknesses. And that's the name of the
Right.
game.
I think you would
Just
say even deeper that you're saying like knowing the purpose of the workout also lets you target that workout better. I think it's like a manifestation concept, but just, in a short microcosm, right? It's like, hey, today my goal is to do a hit workout or to do a lactic threshold or to do, like you said, athletic durability or to do a base workout. But I really, before I go into it, my brain knows everything about the purpose of it, what I'm really trying to do, my objective, which I think lays out, okay, well, I know that I'm trying to do my recovery workouts. I'm not supposed to do, supposed to be at this heart rate and not above this heart rate. But because I know that ahead of time and I know the benefits of that and I know the detriments of overdoing it, okay, today I'm actually going to take it easy enough. And then you also, because you do such a good job on that, it's like, hey, today's supposed to be a really hard workout. And I understand that if I don't do a really hard workout, I'm not getting the VO2 max benefits or whatever it is, right? So,
no, you hit the nail on the head, but take it one step further because you were talking about the dyno earlier.
right,
You can sit there and show the individual, I don't care, and I say that respectfully, I don't care what you think the bike is producing. This is what the bike is doing based on raw mathematical numbers.
right,
So please reprogram your brain not to argue with the fact that you've reached a point of diminishing returns where the bike is no longer accelerating. In fact, it's decelerating. You don't
right,
want that. I don't want that. Your parents don't want that. So stop. What'd you call it? I call it going long in the teeth, where they
right.
just they don't shift early
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
right?
Over revving.
So
Yeah.
over revving. So now you look at the heart rate, and you brought up two things that if you get nothing out of today's conversation of anything that I say, 99% of the athletes out there go too hard on their easy days, and they don't go hard enough on their hard days. Now, when I say hard enough, it's got to be very specific to you as an individual. If you're trying to work on your sprint speed, and let's just use some roundabout numbers, your sprint speed number on heart rate has to be above 190. Just because you're doing a quote unquote hard workout, if the heart rate is at 181, 182, you haven't gone hard enough to improve the energy system that's currently holding you back. That's why we train with very, very accurate heart rate numbers and we test them every 6 weeks. We don't use a generic numbers that come in the watch. Not that
So,
Garmin is wrong. Garmin
right,
is trying to appease the whole world.
right. Yeah. I was going to say that, same, I think applies to, it's exactly right. That's super good. So I probably tied it up here in a little bit. If you, we talked about heat management, we're into the fall, the winter, all that kind of stuff coming up right now. Depending where in the country, you might already be nice, still hot here in Texas, probably 90 today or something, but actually it's pretty nice today. But long and short, on the physiological side, is it just all preparation, like your training, your nutrition, your hydration? Because once you're there, or is there some things that you have for your athletes that may be specific to the heat on those days, or let's just say, like, for example, you have successive motos in a regional time of the year, where it's very hot. You have very quick turn times. If a guy did get a little bit overheated, not like, full cook, not heat exhaustion, but like, oh, wow, that was a really strenuous moto on me. I had to dig really deep to get this position and I'm really hurting. Are there things that you guys can do to really help them get recovered and ready for this next upcoming moto and the rest of that weekend? Like, I think regional weekend is the hardest weekend in the US in the amateur circuit.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have ways to help them recover from it. And without sounding sarcastic, our goal is to never let it happen. So the idea here is we do race day simulations. We duration, intensity, heart rate, heat, humidity. Same thing with our Olympic athletes, right? If you are going to be a triathlete and you're going to a race that's got like Ironman France this year, it's 8,000 feet of climbing over 112 miles of biking. So you've got to be able to take 112 miles of cycling, know when the hills are going to, like the first half of the bike ride is literally all uphill. So if you burn a lot of matches on the uphill for the first 50, 55 miles, it's not going to hurt you because you get to dive bomb back into town, but it's going to crater your run of a 26.2 mile run. So it's about burning matches. But to answer your question specifically, our goal as a company is that you never fall victim to the heat and humidity.
Do you think that on that front, not to interrupt you, is it so that from that perspective, that would mean potentially that it's a little bit better to just over these successive motos for our race weekend, right? Not just not go into that debt zone at all. Your successive results will be better by staying out of that debt zone.
We have to manage the weekend. You mentioned a weekend of racing, right?
Right.
Multiple days of racing. You have to be in it from start to finish. So it doesn't do anybody any good. And we see it at Loretta's every year. The guy that goes 2:39, right? It's over. Same thing with the motor, right? Doesn't do you any good to just go out and grenade yourself. It's all the same thing.
It's so funny to say that. I never even thought about this. So what moto do people put fresh tires on for at Loretta's or at regionals?
Yeah.
First moto. And what moto do they put fresh clutches in?
Yep.
Moto 1. When is the bike the freshest? Right. Moto 1. But at Loretta's, like, maybe you should run practice and whatever, and run moto. And then midweek, like maybe we should, I haven't even thought about the strategy, right? But maybe that's when we put our new clutch in the bike. If the other one was okay, well, we replaced it just to show up, with the new clutch. Well, if we really didn't need it, why don't we just do a couple motos and then put the clutch in it, right? And like make sure that our bike is 100% for Moto 3s. Like that's something that I hadn't really even thought strategy-wise personally, because, oh yeah, we'll build your bike, it'll be fresh, you put a couple hours on it, go to Loretta's. And then, no, that's actually something I hadn't even thought about there. It's like take the physiological side and put it to the dirt bike side. Let's make sure our bike is good on Moto 3.
Well, it's managing ego, right? Because we're only as good as our last win. We know that. But the problem is not really a problem. I see it as an opportunity. I love Loretta's. You have 3 motos. You have 5 days. Manage it. And, with the few exceptions, we could probably count on 1, maybe 2 hands how many people have gone 1-1-1 at Loretta's over the years.
That very rare.
A Jet Reynolds, a AC, very few, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the idea of how many championships, we're very fortunate. At the time of this recording, we have 421 amateur number 1 plates right now. And it's not by just winning every moto. It's about, okay, if I go to Daytona, I've got 2 days of racing. If I go to Loretta's, I've got 5 days of racing. If I go to Mammoth, I've got 2 days of racing. If I go to AZ Open, Cal Classic, Ponca, well, it's a lot different when I go to, even Gatorback, right? You've got roughly 2 days of supercross, roughly 3 days of motocross. The days that you've only got 1 day of racing, you still have 2 to 3 motos per class, but you're racing over the course of 12 hours. I'm using loose numbers here, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's not about whether you won the one moto. It's about what are you there to do? If it's you only need to punch your card through, well, then we're looking at, let's just say, top 4. Now, again, that's where ego gets caught up. You would be much better off. Let's say you're trying to get, most people do this, right? They race 4 classes, try to qualify for 2. Well, you're spreading yourself out over 4 classes to try to qualify for 2. Why do you care if you win the first moto of each class and go 117? You're not even in.
Mm-hmm.
You're much better off. So it's all about economizing the weekend. It's all about how many matches are you going to burn? And then for some of the poor families, they race consecutive weekends.
Yeah, I know. That's just because they have
if you're running a big bike, small bike, and dad's in one class and the son or daughter's in another class, now you're back-to-back weekends. Now you got residual fatigue, because your original question is, how do you manage heat? And we have all kinds of tricks up our sleeves on the things that we do, because just like a motor, we're keeping the internal core temperature down, and then we regulate it because it's going to elevate just like your motor, right? But you said something that is so cool. If you look at the idea that, and I'm going to use your words here, paraphrasing, the motor's designed that it can pretty much run at a pretty high intensity for 20, 24, 36 hours, whatever it is, as long as you don't introduce the new heat with the clutch basket. That motor's designed that it can handle X amount of hours at X intensity. Human body's the same way until it becomes dehydrated, calorie deficient, and or can't dissipate heat anymore. Otherwise, the body can just keep going and going and going and going and going. And this is where you get into, you've got to control the heart rate to go the distance. There's an inverse relationship. If we're going a 4-minute sprint, heart rate goes up because the duration is down. If I'm doing a 20-minute moto at Loretta's, I've got to adjust that. If I do a 3-hour GNCC, I've got to adjust it even further. And if you don't, you will pay the consequences. It's not a threat. It's a physiological fact.
Dumb question. Did you see J Mart posted his marathon and heart rate in times and splits?
Mm-hmm.
That dude must love suffering.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that factors into that.
I mean, it's late in the race. He's just doing his best, but I was just blown away. I don't know what his full peak heart rate numbers must be, but the dude, like I was reading a thing about Lance and his 30-minute time trials, and he like had the just mental capability to suffer deep into his lactic threshold numbers. Like he could just go, he obviously that's training too, right? And all the other stuff involved. But I was just like, he's obviously this is a race. He's putting out his max effort. So the end of it's going to be your highest that you can sustain. But I was blown away, like 180s and then late in the race, mid 190s. I was like, holy shoot, that kid must have a hell of a heart motor going on. Like, and then love to suffer. There's just no question. I was blown away. And that's, let's be honest, that's most elite level pro motocrossers. You're not going to meet many athletes on the planet who can suffer more, I think, than motocross racers, because they're always at threshold for their entire career, right? They're just pushing the absolute max and they know how to do it. And I don't know what it is about racing dirt bikes that's different. You would know. But compared to riding a bicycle or compared to running or compared to where you physically have to force yourself to keep going to put the heart rate out, it's like if you just hang on to that dirt bike, your heart rate just keeps going up if you're hanging on too much, right? So I think just dirt bikers are wired weird that way. But yeah, it was
beautiful part about the reason why the heart rate will always be the highest on the motorcycle is the more muscle you use, the higher the heart rate. So runners' heart rate's higher than the cycling because of the impact and the load bearing. What I love about moto is you have some of our top guys that they ride road bikes, they mountain bike, they run, they swim. They can go do a triathlon, but I'd be pretty hard pressed to get one of my triathletes to take, and I would use Ken Roczen Suzuki without an electric start. They'd be lucky to get it started. The first time somebody of your friends came over, knew nothing about motorcycles, they can't do it, right? Especially I'm old school. Pull out a Mako 490, KRF 500, YZ 465 or 490, and that it kicks back and throws them over the bars when they're in the garage, right? You're like, yeah, kickstart it. And first of all, the Kickstarter goes through their sneaker, right?
Yeah.
And then it throws them over the bars because of the kickback. So if you could get them to start the bike, I don't think they could go more than 5 laps without being completely tuckered. But yet, you can take someone that does moto and they can go run a 5K, 10K, or a marathon like the J Mart did. So that's I agree with you. Moto is it's a completely different level of badass, because what people think is a serious sport, cycling, running, triathlon, etc., our athletes do it for training for a sport that's legitimately badass. Now
it's wild, right?
I'm not taking anything away.
No.
For those of you who follow Ironman, our world record now is sitting at 7.5 hours for 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a marathon run. They're, if you know swimming, they're at 50 to 55 minutes. They're biking under 4 hours. That's what they did in Nice, France, with 8,000 feet of climbing. And then they got off and ran a 2:30 marathon.
That's insane.
And just to put it in perspective, J Mart's time was right around the 3-hour mark. They're running 30 minutes faster after biking 112 after swimming 2.4.
Yeah.
I'm not saying those triathletes aren't badasses, but I don't think they could kickstart your KX 500 or your 490.
No. It's funny you say that. You can tell new people to the sport and novices back in the day bike how they kickstart their bike. It's obvious. They don't have the balance skills developed yet to lay in the weight and kick the weight and all that stuff. So this is what's really funny, how spoiled KTM owners are nowadays. KTM for I don't know how long, but forever now on their off-road motorcycles has had electric start, right? So I was in Idaho at some ride event thing that I'm trying to go do more of. And actually, by the way, if you ever hear of the Dusty Lizard and you're into dual sporting, adventure riding, off-road mountain riding, go to one. They're on the west coast of the US. Phenomenal. Great events. Love them. So the guy there, his electric start broke on his 2-stroke. It's like a 300 KTM. And it just broke, and we're trying to help him out. Well, he had bought this is an old enough model that had the kickstart backup. So he bought the kit. So what we did for him is put that kit in the bike, right? And just say, okay, well, you can get his starter motor's trash, didn't have one. He needed a new starter motor. He goes, all right, well, now that's in there. He's like, I've never kickstarted a dirt bike before. I'm like, you're 40 years old. Like, what do you mean you haven't? He's like, I've always owned these. Like, they've always had an electric start. And he picked it up later, right? I'm like, so he tried to kick it. Like you said, it's your best, and he knows how to ride, right? Could not do it. couldn't pay him $1 million. He couldn't start the bike. He couldn't get the balance and the weight of the kick, and all that stuff. And I was giving him so much hell. I mean, I'm old school, so I'm like, you kick it like a man,
Yeah.
So anyway,
How many kids can't drive a stick shift?
right, exactly, right. So I go over there and kick it in. I started first kick, and I can't know, and what I was thinking of myself as I walked over there, luckily I still kickstart 85s and 125s, but those aren't that hard to kick, right? Like 250, a 300, a 500, a 490, you got to kick those, right? And so I'm like thinking in my brain, I'm like, when's the last time that I really kicked the bike? Like I had to actually kick it, I was like, I don't want to embarrass myself,
Yep.
So you had to get over there. That's how kids will never know. They'll kickstart these 85s and 125s, and then they're never going to know the pain that I knew when I got my very first big bike, which was a Yamaha 250F, and it would stall or I would crash or I'd park it on the side of track and practice day. And then I'd be out there for the rest of the day kickstarting that damn thing because it wouldn't start. So they'll never know. They'll never know.
And you get a brand new pair of boots and you don't put the Kickstarter just right. It just corks your new boot. You're like, oh no, man.
The worst.
So, yeah, that's the good stuff. Well, everybody, we can't thank you guys enough for supporting this podcast. Derek, enjoy it. We have a couple guests that if we can get our schedules lined up, we've got some exciting guests that'll come on. Again, we want to thank our friends over at HBI Auto. Billy Wink and his team are first class all the way around. So if you guys are in the area or in the market for a Porsche at any capacity, definitely hit them up. Derek, always a pleasure. I look forward to next month. It'll be here before we know it. But thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the time.
Peace.
Take care.